You're all set.
All right, so thanks for coming and checking out our digital public history presentation. Michael and I are interested in talking about OER as part of a sort of dynamic possibilities for teaching and learning. So we're going to talk a little bit about some projects we've been doing. Um, I'll talk first, then Michael will talk about his, and if we have some time at the end, we can take some questions. So the project that my students are working on is called the Akwesasne transcription project. And for those of you who aren't historians, transcription is just the basically taking something that's written in some sort of script and turning it into a digital format, right? Which, for those of you who have tried to read old handwriting, is a real limitation for a lot of people. Our students, particularly many of whom haven't learned cursive, it's very difficult for them to read. So part of the particular document that the students are working with is the Indian agent's letter book at the St. Regis Reserve. And this is the native reservation or reserve, depending on which side of the border you're on, that is in the northern part of New York State. It's bisected by an international border. Um, so what I have students do is just try their hand at doing some transcriptions, and we're using that to develop a kind of digital resource of the transcribed original document. The letter books run from the 1840s up until I think the 1940s, so there's a lot of stuff to work with. Um, where does this happen? It has happened in independent studies I've done with students. It's happened in my New York State history class. I try to kind of deconstruct New York State around the question, what is New York State? And uh, that's an interesting thing for people to sort of see, where does the state end, and for whom. And I'm presently using it in a class that's a public history class. So this is a sort of primary example of a public history project. It is a historical project that is outward facing to the public and engages the public, in this particular case, the students. But presumably, once we create the kind of archive document, it will be made available to the world. So in that regard, I think it's a prime example of OER. It's helpful for historians, budding historians, as I hope students are, to really look at stuff from the past and try to make sense of it for themselves. So in doing the transcriptions, they therefore confront what's in the letter books, and have to think critically about it. Um, so it is, in fact, OER to its core, because it's based on a document that the Library and Archives Canada digitized as part of a very large project they've been doing about digitizing Indigenous documents relating to Indigenous people in Canada. Um, so it's readily available on their website, except it's in a form that's not particularly easy to use. Um, the transcription has been a great way for me to engage students, not just in the process, but actually to really partner with a lot of public institutions. Most notably, the Library and Archives of Canada is really quite excited about this project, because once we do the transcription, it will, in fact, live as part of their catalog. And so everyone who comes to the Library and Archive of Canada can, in fact, keyword search this. It means great possibilities for people getting access to a document that in a lot of ways was pretty illegible. Um, we're also partnering in the class. They're doing a presentation for the students about the whole question of doing public history with Indigenous people, and in consultation with Indigenous people. This is a really important part of this class, which is a public history class and has to confront questions about audience and interaction with the public. So the students are going to get a chance to talk to archivists, and also, if they write responses to this, they're going to be able to be published on their blog. So that's a great opportunity. The ultimate result will be kind of twofold. One, the transcriptions will live on the Library and Archives website catalog. I'm also doing a transcription project website that's working with uh, this OER and SUNY's initiative. So there will be a kind of SUNY representation of this as well. So I think it's a great opportunity to do a meaningful public history work with students and get it out of the classroom and into the public sphere. And so in that regard, I think it's a sort of great example about how OER kind of can really encourage us to think about how we make students do something that might have some career impact. Okay, Michael?
Just making sure you can hear me. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Tom. My name is Michael Kramer. I'm a historian at SUNY Brockport with a background in digital public history. And like Tom's wonderful project, I have done work in the past on specific topics, such as a big digital public history project about the Berkeley Folk Music Festival that students at Brockport are able to participate in as research assistants and interns. But today, I want to talk a little bit about some institutional work I'm trying to do around um, historical inquiry in the SUNY system as a kind of version of OER. And I want to thank Tom for organizing the panel and to the folks at CPD for organizing this and other events so that we can get together, and to all of you for being here. I'm going to read a little bit from my notes so that I don't go on too long. And talk to you about a kind of pilot program that I'm working on this year called the SUNY History Lab. I see part of our jobs as SUNY faculty who study the past as to create new historical knowledge. But I feel that we are not harnessing this part of our work as effectively as we could for public use. So rather than think of OER as the abandonment of public education for private kind of ed tech solutionism, my question is, what if we rethought OER as building infrastructure within the SUNY system in disciplines and areas of research, and in the expertise we have as researchers and teachers, and putting resources toward being able to deliver better to the public the value of faculty expertise in SUNY. That's the idea behind the SUNY History Lab, which we are piloting this year through an innovative instruction technology grant. The goal of the SUNY History Lab is to build, piece by piece, a scholarly network focused on historical inquiry, first across SUNY campuses, and then with key partners in the state as a whole. It's an ambitious idea, but one that, if built piece by piece through piloting, might serve as more of an in-system approach to OER, or I prefer to call it PER, public educational resources. So first, going piece by piece, the goal this year is to begin to develop the SUNY part of the SUNY History Lab. We realized that before we could deliver faculty knowledge and expertise to institutions and citizens of the state, we have to construct a more robust scholarly network within the very decentralized SUNY system. So our first step is to create places for scholarly exchange about historical inquiry. Rather than pit campuses against each other, how might we work together to foster connections among those whose job it is to explore the past so that they can exchange research, teaching ideas, and possibilities for cross-campus projects? This is step one of the SUNY History Lab, to create a regular webinar for presentations and exchange about historical inquiry in the system, as well as a website and a listserv for further interactions about historical inquiry. Even this will take time to develop and figure out, not just technically, but also institutionally. How do we balance the broader disciplinary questions of historical inquiry as a whole with the many subfields based on region, time period, and methodologies of historical research? In other words, history already is a pretty big interdisciplinary field. How do we distribute possibilities for participation effectively across campuses? How do we sustain the History Lab as a kind of virtual SUNY laboratory for historical inquiry. And what then? What if we begin to develop a network for historical inquiry in the SUNY system? A SUNY virtual history laboratory is worth doing in of itself and could serve as a model of discipline-oriented system-wide infrastructure in other fields for improving research and exchange among faculty and students. That's great. But how do we make it more OER, or perhaps PER, as I've been putting it? How do we make this a public educational resource? The second part of our Innovative Instruction Technology Grant is to pilot the History Lab as a place that can digitally curate SUNY faculty historical research for effective public use. What would it take to be able to create digital modules that translate SUNY historical research and teaching expertise for K through 12 education in the state, for museums and libraries and other public institutions in the state, for municipalities and nonprofits, say a town celebrating a holiday or seeking more knowledge about how to work with new immigrant populations to their communities? One could even imagine this digital curation of faculty expertise serving businesses in the state, such as a local bookstore seeking to build an in-store marketing program of events. To be able to develop a system of curating faculty research is a challenge, but also it provides another pedagogical opportunity for us as teachers in the SUNY system. For we might even involve our own students in this work of publicly curating faculty research for public use. Indeed, creating digital modules of historical inquiry for public use becomes a promising training ground for teaching core skills of information literacy, digital fluency, historical understanding, research abilities, writing and communication effectiveness, and project management. The result, if we could develop a sustainable SUNY History Lab, could be a richer world both of specialized SUNY historical research exchange for faculty and students, new kinds of pedagogical opportunities, and a stitching of the research parts of SUNY historian jobs into the public value of the SUNY system for citizens of the state. We could be able to deliver cutting-edge historical understanding in accessible forms to institutions of the state, such as schools, libraries, museums, historical societies, interest groups, nonprofits, municipalities, businesses, and really as a public good for use by any interested citizen. So it's an ambitious idea, but one that might translate to other disciplines. One could picture labs in literary studies, the social sciences, environmental work, the natural sciences, all of the areas of research and teaching at SUNY that, with investment in infrastructure, could be more effectively shared with the public as valuable educational resources for individual edification, for expanded community resilience and health and knowledge, even for job development, and for the overarching public good of the state. Thank you.
So I think we're at a point where we'll take some questions. I don't really know how much time we've got, but 5 minutes apparently, either through the chat or otherwise. I had to cut out, so I'm not convinced my system is all that robust.
Tom, I don't see any questions in the chat as of right now, so it doesn't look like you missed anything. So anything that
Okay.
pops into the chat going forward will be good.
Michael, you want to answer that?
Yeah, Hannah Toombs asks, this is amazing. In terms of folks contributing materials to the site, is anyone able to add material to the site, or is it currently only open to SUNY professors? Great question. I think the ultimate idea is to really have a pretty intensive process of curation. So there could be eventually partnerships with other kinds of historians at other institutions, with local historians, with communities, to develop materials digitally that are effective and accessible. But I would say that we wanted to really always be stitched back to SUNY faculty, in the sense that our goal here is to expand the public value and the public use of what SUNY do as public servants in the state. So the idea would be to open up opportunities over time through an infrastructure that really brings the value of this kind of public history work back to campuses, back to students who can use opportunities to train and learn, kind of in the way they're doing with Tom's project. But here really kind of focused on the knowledge and the expertise of SUNY faculty in partnership with others who have different kinds of expertise and different kind of historical knowledge to share in the state.
I'd like to just say something generally about this question, about sort of where this lives and what drives it. I have to say that I was really happy to find SUNY Create because it opened up an opportunity that was being closed down to me on my campus. Whenever I wanted to sort of have a digital presence, I was told we don't have the capacity on campus to support it. And I think there's a potential of a bottleneck at the campus level when people say we don't have resources available. So I think in some ways this is one way where SUNY as a whole can really encourage the development of this by, like providing a space and providing the support. That to me is really kind of an important part of this story. I'm kind of doing it like a guerrilla, like activity at the moment, not really with a whole lot of support.
I had a question, I think, more directed towards Michael. I was just wondering if there are other networks that you're aware of, by other state institutions, by other collaborations between other higher ed institutions that are doing similar work.
That's a great question, Ed. On the webinar front, there are some really good models. There's the Washington History Seminar, which the American Historical Association is involved in supporting. The Newberry Library in Chicago for many years has run scholarly seminars that during the pandemic became online seminars. I've been involved with some other areas of interest, like in popular music studies, where there are some really well-established kind of webinar programs that are effective at sharing knowledge and having dialogue online. And we have the resources of what we're doing right now, the resources that have been built up by CPD and people like you, Ed, to foster system-wide online collaboration. On the, I won't go on too long, but on the curation front, I think there's been much more scattershot kinds of work done from what I see in other states. There's been some really interesting work that the Teagle Foundation is doing around humanities education, but less so with a digital and kind of faculty-oriented approach. I've seen some universities developing projects of various sorts, but I think they face the problems that we see Tom mentioning, which is kind of the possibilities of kind of hacking your way towards a project, but the lack of the infrastructure that kind of connects individual faculty interests to a broader statewide system. And that's some of the kind of infrastructural work that I think we could try to figure out, and that people like you have been thinking about and CPD has been thinking about. And that I'm hoping that through this IITG, really, I mean, all I'm able to do on top of my other obligations as a faculty member is pilot and kind of propose some possibilities that could then be taken forward in more robust ways if there's interest.
Yeah, I really loved in your talk how you referred to people as infrastructure. Because it's easy to point towards technologies and websites and things, but what you're talking about is at a more personal level. So thank you for bringing that to this conversation.
Yeah, the technology really needs to be there to serve the people, and the people doing this are really, I mean, this goes to Hannah's question as well, and to the work Tom is doing, which is that people are coming to these projects with different kinds of backgrounds, different kinds of expertise. So I think it will take some piloting and continued experimentation here within a kind of a disciplinary framework of history to try to figure out the right way to allow a collective project to further individual and institutional interests. You know, how do you get the right material to teachers so they can really use it? What they need in the classroom is different from, you know, kind of what faculty are thinking about. How do we make these bridges? Maybe it's kind of a bridge work that we could try to continue to figure out what are the effective bridges and how do we create them and how do we sustain them? These are the big questions to me.
Honestly, have no idea how far we're supposed to go here or how far we can go, but I would answer any questions as long as we don't get cut off.
So the presentation after this in this room has been canceled.
Oh,
So
okay.
I don't
Oh,
have to worry about bringing another presenter in. So I can give you a couple more minutes if anybody has any questions. The next presentation doesn't start till 2 in the next room. So
gotcha.
more
Okay.
minutes. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to entertain them.
Tom, I have a question for you, which is to tell us a little bit more about the kind of process, the guerrilla process. How have you problem solved kind of out of necessity to bring this really exciting project forward?
Good question. I mean, I have to thank you for getting me connected to Ed. That was helpful. Michael and I went to a seminar, history seminar in Victorian culture, 2 summers ago, I guess it was, and found that we had both gone to the same graduate university and had the same advisor, and that was kind of helpful. And we were both in the SUNY system. Um, so like making the connections, I think is helpful. The people in Ottawa, I got lucky in the sense that I was able to get in touch with one of their public services librarians, you know, and she was excited by the project and got me hooked into the folks there. So um, you know, the course that I'm teaching is a public history course, and by definition, it has all sorts of expertise that I don't requires all sorts of expertise that I don't have. So I'm bringing in a lot of guest lecturers, and I have to say that one of the things is this project is possible partly through the fact of the pandemic, in the sense that we've come to feel that Zoom, you know, is a good way to actually you know, work in the world, right? I think 5 years ago, no one would have thought, you know, how can you have a class where you've got all these guest lecturers? Well, we're up in Potsdam. We're far away from a lot of places. So if we want lectures, guest lectures online, that's helpful. And in some ways, it was a necessity because it came out of a student seminar project. A student was interested in Indigenous studies, and we have, you know, I said, well, there's this reservation just down the road. Why don't you find out something about that? That was when pandemic started. He was in the midst of his research. I was trying to find more research for him. I have done a bunch of research at the Library of Archives Canada in Ottawa, and I just happened to go online and found that they had digitized this thing. So I think we're at a good time to do this, just because a lot of this material is available, and then reaching out to people who also have a reason to see things kind of emerge in a public sense, right? I think there's a lot of great partnerships with libraries and archives, museums, local institutions. So, you know, like seniors organizations, like all these people, genealogists, right? There's a whole lot of people who are interested in understanding the past, who you can make connections to. But it is a fair amount of work, and you have to, I've found I've had to cede a lot of my control in the classroom, which is, well, I'll tell you how it works out. But so far it's okay. I don't know. We'll see. But
It sounds like a real public history. I mean, it has a real public history quality in the sense that you or I come to this as a, you know, as a trained historian, but it turns out that there's a lot of other people and institutions and expertise when it comes to studying the past, and things like libraries and local communities, and you know, there's a particular way in which history work lends itself to this if one is open, as you're saying, if we're open to a kind of collaborative approach to the work. I think that's what I've learned as a public historian in many respects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to just say to those who are on this who might not be historians, we have a very particular interesting situation in New York State, which is that we have a state historian, Devin Lander, who does great work at the New York History Museum. And we also have, by law, every municipality in New York State is supposed to have an appointed public historian. That program has always struggled because there's no funding for those positions, except when particular municipalities have done some investing at the local level in those posts. However, there's this interesting infrastructure there in New York State to build upon. And of course, like any public institutions, any state, there's lots of bureaucracy and lots of mysteries I'm still trying to figure out. But there's some really interesting opportunities, and there might be parallel ones in other fields in terms of the kind of the history within New York State of literary education, of thinking about climate change, of the sciences, and so on.
Yeah, I think your point about thinking about these labs as not just a history lab, but there's all sorts of ways in which you can foster this kind of community and also collaborative work. And it connects people across the state. And that's a kind of key part of, I think, education, is just to recognize New York State is quite a diverse place. And, whenever I get students from New York City, they're like, oh, that's a little different here in Potsdam. And the students from Potsdam were like, well, it's different out there in Buffalo. So kind of like developing the resources of the state, I think that's the kind of important thing. But as you said, I think it's kind of important to connect with people who already have agendas that you can link with, that you can't do everything yourself. And I'm putting this class together is one thing, but, it would be great if this was part of Michael's, history lab site, right?
Well, Michael, we do have one question from Hannah in there. How do we sign up for the History Lab listserv?
Well, Hannah, we're doing this presentation at the very earliest days, so the listserv is not set up yet. But I will put in the link to my provisional History Lab website, where you can just email me, and I will add you to the list once the listserv is up and running. So I'm going to put that link in for anyone who's interested. There it is.
Michael, sign me up too.
Okay, I will sign you up. Please feel free to email me at mkramer@brockport.edu as well. You guys are the early adopters. And we'll keep working on it. And I welcome, feedback by anyone beyond our session today. If you want to share ideas or questions, this project it's a kind of pilot program right now. We'll see where we can get it. And, as Tom has pointed out, and me too, there's, as the CPD staff knows well, probably as all of you know, these projects are tricky, and we have to try to pilot, experiment, problem solve, and build from there.
I think we could learn a lot from the digital storytelling movement and think about it as digital storytelling within the context of our disciplines. And there's a real robust conversation to happen around there, and a bunch of examples and tools, and it's the kind of thing that gets me excited.
Well, thank you very much